Hello everybody, I'm Gwen Campbell-Mindes. Welcome to Gwen's Bookish Ramblings, and we are now on the tragic story of Moreta, Dragonlady of Pern by Anne McCaffrey. This is the second last book in the Pern series that I will be doing for this channel because I just don't feel like doing any of the others. As I said before, I'm really doing these in the order that I felt like rereading them, which, is entirely idiosyncratic and based on how I feel in the moment. So, do not take this series as any sort of recommended order, because I absolutely 110% recommend that you read these in either chronological or order of publication. Do not read them in this order. It will be confusing and problematic. Anyways, so this is a book that is telling a story that is vaguely hinted at in the very first Dragonriders of Pern book, that is Dragonflight. That in Dragonflight there is some discussion periodically from time to time about every time Lessa gets upset about the fact that they're not letting her, fly with her moth, learn how to fly, learn how to go between, do the things that dragons do, what's brought up is Moreta, and the ballad of Moreta's ride. The implication, of course, being that Moreta is a queen dragon rider who, rode her dragon on some kind of epic flight, and if she's doing that, then clearly there is precedent for queen riders to get on the top of their dragon and fly places. The very end of the book, when Falar, is saying, wait, you let your queens fly, and Tyrone says, wait, you can't stop them? Don't you know your ballads? And Falar is forced to say, listen, we've had only one queen rider for so long at Bend and Weir that there was no possible reason any of us were even thinking of letting the queen go flying off somewhere, because we only had one. Anyways, so the story of Moreta's Ride is a book that I would never ever have thought of reading during the pandemic, and am particularly grateful that I didn't, because the story of Moreta's Ride is of a pandemic. The opening is the happy tale of Moreta going to a gather that is basically kind of a fair, and that there are two major gathers going on, and some kind of weird animal being shown off at another, and everything is great. And then the next day, they're told that an epidemic is loose on Pern. And we've just been through a pandemic. We are still in the middle of a pandemic, in effect. If you don't believe me, consider the hospitalization rates due to that pandemic. But anyways, the thing is that, this was done in the 80s. The most recent pandemic of that kind and sort of scale was the Great Flu pandemic, the Spanish flu of the 19-teens, which ravaged the world and killed millions of people, which is the reason why people get vaccinated for the flu every year, is because the flu is horrifically deadly when it gets going. And what happens in this is that they get an outbreak of the flu. And all over, people are getting sick and becoming violently ill, and they have massive, massive numbers of deaths. There are, the usual kinds of epidemic stories that you get in terms of when you're hearing about things like the Black Plague, where you have in this case, of course, it's holds, not towns, but like these whole settlements that are just decimated and there's no one left alive to do anything. And it's a massive, massive planet-wide, well, continent-wide tragedy. And the story of Moreta's Ride is that at the very end of this book, one of the Weir leaders, the thing is that at that point in the book, the Dragon Riders are asked to, in effect, they figured out how to make an inoculation, a vaccine, and so they have made this vaccine, and the Master Healer, Capium, had basically said, we need to vaccinate all of the horses, well, runners as they call them, and all of the humans, and we need to do it all at once. And we need to do it fast because we have a very, very short window in which to stop a second wave. And so what they do is they basically go to the Weirs and they say, look, we need you to send dragons out to deliver all of these to absolutely everybody. And you need to do it fast, and it needs to be done all at once. And what happens is one of the Weir leaders decides that he's too bitter and too angry and too everything to even think about participating, and he uses the full weight of his position as Weir leader and the fact that he rides a bronze to basically prevent any of his riders from making this particular run in this particular region. A region that Moreta was from originally, and it's a region that she knows very, very well. And so she has to make the run. And the tragedy of this is that her gold dragon was clutching. Her gold dragon, Orleith, can't leave her eggs, and so Moreta is on a borrowed dragon. She is on the former weirwoman Larry's dragon, Holth. And Holth is old. She is old, and she's tired, and they do yeoman's labor. And at the very end, that one last jump between Holth is too tired, and they don't make it back. And so Moreta dies basically because of her doing something that shouldn't have been her responsibility, and delivering this vaccine to make sure that everybody gets it before, you know, a second wave manages to kill people, before the flu virus has a chance to mutate and change and come back again. And the final section of this is, of course, the hatching of Orleith's eggs, but it's an incredibly sad, it's a bittersweet moment. It's a bittersweet ending to the book because, yes, you know, a lovely young woman that we have come to sort of appreciate during the course of this book winds up impressing, and it's all very great. But at the beginning of that last chapter is the statement that Larry, whose dragon died, and it made her virtually suicidal, and Orleith, whose rider died, and when a dragon's rider dies, that dragon suicides. Full stop. It cannot be stopped. They just kill themselves. They just go between, and that's that. And so Larry gets on Orleith, and the two of them go, and it's worse even because it is so very deliberate. Because Moreta and Holth dying, you know, it's not like Larry and Orleith can pick up with each other. The bond between a rider and a dragon is one of those, you know, soulmate, bone deep, soul deep, cannot be understood if you don't have it sorts of things that we only get in fiction. And that they're literally the other halves of each other, and so when the dragon dies or a rider dies, it takes half of you with them when they die. And so riders are likely to commit suicide, and dragons always do, mainly because the other dragons aren't going to stop them, and how do you stop something that is like 20 times your own size that can teleport itself from killing itself? You really can't. All you can do is let it happen. And so, you know, you start off this hatching, which is supposed to be a joyous occasion, with the full knowledge that that two people just committed suicide that morning because the hatching means neither of them have to stay. And so this is an incredibly tragic book, and it's one of those tragedies that is very specifically horrifying because it's a tragedy that didn't have to happen, because if Mittani had just let his riders do what they were going to do, Moreta wouldn't have had to be out there. They wouldn't have had to make the run. Holth wouldn't have been carrying her. It would have been fine. But his stubbornness, his awfulness was the reason why she died. And, you know, it's the kind of tragic death that is worse because it didn't have to happen, because somebody who was supposed to be on your side did something that caused this. So, you know, this is one of those books that it's constantly shot through with mentions of the fact that it's only 8 more years to the end of this Threadfall, and then we can all, you know, live our lives without Thread for the next 250 years. You know, Dragon Riders count their time until it's over and they can stop. And so this whole thing is just so many levels of tragedy, and it's the tragic backdrop to Narilka's story that I talked about earlier, that this is what's going on out in the wider world. Narilka's story is very, very narrowly focused. It's Narilka. It's only about her. But this is about Master Capium. It's about Desdra. It's about Moreta. It's about a lesson. It's, you know, this is Moreta's story, but it's the story of the whole of the Pernese pandemic in sort of a much wider view. And, you know, so this is something that's sort of very well partnered with Narilka, obviously. It would have to be. But it's a very, very different angle. But this and Narilka are two books that I would never have wanted to read at the height of the pandemic, partly because, of course, I don't particularly want to deal with the hyper-politicization or, you know, general upset surrounding it, but also I am not one of those people at the height of the pandemic who said, let's watch every single pandemic movie that's ever been made. That's a great idea. If you are one of those people, I don't understand you, because I don't understand why you want to watch people going through something that is literally happening right now and is horrible and awful. It doesn't really make sense to me. You know, you can turn on the news and get the same thing, and you know, maybe turn on a movie and not get the same thing. But you know, to each their own. So this was one that I both wouldn't have thought of reading 2 years ago, and also am just as glad I didn't think of anyways. So yeah, this is a great book, but it's not a book with an unalloyed happy ending. It's a book with a really, really bittersweet ending in a, it's okay, we made it out, we got to the far end of everything, but our protagonist is dead, and she's dead because somebody else was a jerk. Like, you know, not even she's stopping the evil overlord sort of thing. This is just, you were a jerk. You were a jerk, and your jerk, being a jerk, caused her to die. It just, like, really? Really? Anyways, I think that's about all I've got to say on this one. So, yeah, I will see you all next week.